This is English shorthand dictation number 172 and the dictation speed is 140 words per minute. Ready? Start. The honorable member was not here when I gave my ruling when for the first time the occasion arose some days ago in this session. I shall repeat it for his benefit. The honorable member, as a constitutional lawyer, knows very well that there are three readings given to a bill. There is the first stage of the bill, namely the first reading, when the principles of the bill are discussed. After that, if the bill is referred to a select committee, the House is in a position to criticize the bill as it emerges out of the select committee, or if it is not referred to a select committee, at the second reading when the bill is taken up. Clause by clause, changes are made. All those steps that the honorable members have got to take, they can take at the second reading. Now there may be other honorable members like the honorable member himself. He was not present perhaps throughout the second reading of this bill. He now comes at the third reading. He can oppose the bill if the features of the bill as it passed from the first reading to the second reading have been changed at the clause by clause reading stage and he takes objection to it. Then he can oppose the third reading at the third stage, pointing to certain features which have come into existence at the second reading which are objectionable to him. That is all. Otherwise, the three stages would lose their significance. At the close of each stage, when the question is put, honorable members who are opposed to the measure can oppose it at every stage, provided they confine themselves at the first reading to the principles, at the second reading to the details, and at the third reading to the changes in the various aspects of the bill which have been made since and which are objectionable. That is my ruling. I do not prevent any honorable member from opposing the third reading. For instance, there was the honorable member. He had tabled several amendments which were defeated, and he has opposed the third reading on those very grounds again. He said that he opposed the bill because it does not go far enough, that he had tabled amendments which were defeated or not taken into consideration, and that he now, at the third reading, opposed it because it is not quite satisfactory from his point of view. Similarly, any honorable member, whether he has tabled any amendments or not, can oppose it at the third reading, but he must confine himself to the changes made or not made in the second reading and not go back to the first reading and evoke the same discussion over again as regards the general principles for which the proper time was the first reading stage. Mr. Speaker, having signed the Pune Pact, I am, of course, entirely out of court in discussing the subject of separate electorates. Therefore, I am not going into that part of the bill which deals with the method of representation to be devised for the different minorities for which provision is made in this bill. Perhaps it will be justifiable for me if I mention from what angle of vision I look at this thorny question of joint electorates versus separate electorates. Sir, the way I look at it is this. What is to be the effect of joint electorates, supposing that it was introduced for the different minorities? What will happen is this. One day in 5 years, when the elections will come, a Hindu and a Muslim may go together to a common polling booth. I do not see what else can happen as a result of joint electorates. Please allow me to go into the rest of the 5 years. When there are no elections, the Muslim community will believe in a separate life, a compartmental life to itself. I do not see, as a result of joint electorates, that Hindus and Muslims will come to live together in the same area. I do not see, as a result of joint electorates, that Hindus and Muslims will begin to intermarry. I do not see, as a result of joint electorates, that Hindus and Muslims will interdine. Sir, I take this opportunity to say deliberately that if we want to build up unity, it is not by devising a day, however sacred that day may be, when both Hindus and Muslims will come to the same polling booth. If we want really to devise some means to build up unity, what we should do is to break up the social barrier. I say that in this matter, the lead has to be taken up by the Hindu community because they are a very exclusive community. If other communities live a separate life, it is because the Hindu community regards certain interests as its own interests, and the fault is entirely due to the Hindu community. I say therefore deliberately that there is no use playing with this problem by putting forth a scheme which is ineffectual and which will have no operation except for one day, which may come in the course of 5 years or 3 years. Nothing will happen as a result of this. You may try it. I request my Muslim friends to grant them this opportunity and see if any particular protection will give an opportunity for the two communities not to remain apart. I cannot hold a brief for separate electorates having signed the Poona Pact. I will turn now to the other aspects of the bill and begin by saying that the bill certainly marks a stage in advance from where we are standing, but there is nothing which I find in the bill itself. It is an empty shell. It contains nothing. But for the speech of the Honorable Minister giving what he proposed to do with regard to the reorganization of local bodies, we would certainly have known nothing from the bill as it is. All that the bill says is that the government will be given the power to make rules for this and for that. Beyond that, what is there in the bill? If the statement of objects and reasons was not attached to this bill, we would not have even known what was the principle the government was going to adopt in providing for representation of the different minorities. I say it deliberately that the questions are constitutional questions. It is not a question of carrying ordinary legislation into effect where it has been the practice now, almost sanctified, that the government should be allowed to carry out the policy by rules. We are delegating part of our authority to the government to do something. We are delegating part of our taxing power to them. We are delegating to them the authority of making elective representation. I submit most deliberately that it is a constitutional question and as such ought to be settled in all its details in this House and ought not to be left to the sweet will of the executive. Take the example of the Government of India Act. What does this bill deal with? This bill deals with franchise, deals with the communities that are to get representation, deals with constituencies, and deals with the method of voting. Look at the Government of India Act. What does it do? Has it left the number of seats to the minorities to the sweet will of the executive? Has it left the question of dividing constituencies to the sweet will of the executive? Has it left the method of voting to the sweet will of the executive? There is nothing of the kind. all that has been done by orders in council, which are as much part of the Government of India Act as the Government of India Act itself. It is necessary that we should do things in the way in which constitutional things are required to be done. This is my first submission with regard to this bill. As regards other matters, the first thing I should like to know from the Honorable Minister in charge of the bill is this. He has very graciously said in the statement of objects and reasons that the principle which he wishes to follow in allotting seats for the different minorities is the principle of population.